On the morning of August 12, 1944, a junior lieutenant named James Halloran sat in the mud outside the shattered remains of a farmhouse 30 miles east of Avranches, holding a piece of cardboard torn from a ration box. With a stub of charcoal, he drew what his commanding officers would later call the most ridiculous tactical diagram they'd ever seen. A series of circles and arrows that looked like something a child might scrawl. 3 colonels laughed at it. 2 majors dismissed him from the briefing tent. But 6 days later, that crude drawing would guide 12 American soldiers in the destruction of 8 German supply convoys, cut off enemy supplies across an entire sector for 30 days, and prove a tactical principle that would help General George S. Patton's Third Army complete one of the most devastating advances in modern warfare. For decades, Halloran's name appeared in no official histories. His innovation received no commendation. He asked for none. But what he discovered in the mud of France, and what he did with 12 men and almost no support, saved thousands of American lives and changed how the United States Army thought about supply interdiction. This is the story of how one lieutenant's child's drawing became a tactical revolution, and how the man who laughed loudest at it would later order it taught at every staff college in the European theater. The summer of 1944 marked a turning point in the war against Nazi Germany, but victory was far from certain. By early August, American forces had finally broken through the German defenses at Normandy after weeks of brutal fighting in the hedgerows. The bocage country of northwestern France had consumed men and tanks at a horrific rate, and many senior commanders worried that the Wehrmacht, even in retreat, possessed the ability to establish new defensive lines that could stall the Allied advance for months. The German army in France still numbered over 450,000 men, supported by thousands of armored vehicles, artillery pieces, and fortified positions stretching from Brittany to the Belgian border. Intelligence reports confirmed that German commanders were rushing reinforcements from the interior of France, hoping to create a defensive line along the Seine River that could hold through the winter. If they succeeded, the liberation of France would grind to a halt. The war would drag into 1946 or beyond, and tens of thousands more Americans would die fighting for every village and river crossing. The weather in early August was oppressively hot, with temperatures reaching 90 degrees Fahrenheit by midday. Dust from thousands of vehicles coated everything: uniforms, weapons, food, water. The roads of northern France, never designed for modern military traffic, disintegrated under the weight of Sherman tanks and supply trucks. Entire divisions sat idle for hours, waiting for fuel that couldn't reach them through the congested road network. German artillery still controlled key road junctions, forcing American columns to detour through narrow farm lanes where a single disabled vehicle could paralyze an entire regiment. The air smelled of diesel fuel, cordite, and death. The bodies of German soldiers killed in the breakouts still lay in the August heat, bloating and rotting beside destroyed vehicles. Into this situation stepped a force that would transform everything. General George S. Patton's Third Army, finally unleashed after weeks of waiting. George Smith Patton, Jr. was born on November 11, 1885 in San Gabriel, California, into a family that breathed military tradition. His grandfather had died fighting for the Confederacy at Cedar Creek, shot through the stomach while leading a cavalry charge. His great-uncle had fallen at Gettysburg. Young George grew up listening to these stories, absorbing them until they became part of his identity. He struggled terribly in school. Reading tormented him. Spelling defeated him, and modern researchers believe he suffered from severe dyslexia that went undiagnosed throughout his childhood. He couldn't read until age 12, a fact that humiliated him and drove him to compensate through sheer force of will. He memorized military texts his father read aloud, developed a photographic memory for maps and terrain, and pushed his body through punishing physical training because he couldn't excel academically. At the Virginia Military Institute and later at West Point, Patton repeated his freshman year due to poor grades, but he mastered military drill and horsemanship with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He competed in the 1912 Olympics in the modern pentathlon, finishing 5th against the world's finest military athletes. He designed the M1913 cavalry saber, still considered one of the most effective swords ever created for mounted combat. During World War I, Patton commanded the first American tank units in combat, was wounded leading his men forward at the Meuse-Argonne, and emerged convinced that speed and aggression, not defensive firepower, would dominate future warfare. Between the wars, while other officers focused on fortifications and defensive doctrine, Patton studied mobile warfare, reading everything written about cavalry operations from Genghis Khan to Napoleon. He was abrasive, profane, politically tone-deaf, and utterly convinced of his own tactical genius. In 1943, he slapped 2 soldiers suffering from combat fatigue in Sicily, calling them cowards, and the scandal nearly ended his career. General Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, kept Patton in reserve for nearly a year, using him as a decoy to convince the Germans he would lead the invasion at Calais. By August 1944, Patton was 58 years old, physically fit, intellectually sharp, and burning with barely contained rage at being sidelined while younger generals commanded armies in combat. The Third Army became operational at noon on August 1, 1944, and its mission was brutally simple: break through the German lines, advance as rapidly as possible, and prevent the enemy from establishing any coherent defensive position. The objective was nothing less than the destruction of German military power in France before winter. The Third Army consisted of 8 divisions, roughly 200,000 men, supported by thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and trucks. It faced a German force that was reeling but still dangerous, capable of mounting fierce counterattacks and defending key terrain with fanatical determination. The Germans held most of Brittany, with heavily fortified ports at Brest, Saint-Malo, and Lorient. They controlled the approaches to Paris. They still occupied most of central and eastern France. The supply lines, though stretched and under constant air attack, continued to function, bringing ammunition, fuel, and reinforcements forward from depots in Germany. American intelligence estimated that if the Germans could buy 3 weeks to reorganize, they could create a defensive line strong enough to hold through the autumn, potentially into 1945. The terrain favored the defense, rivers running east to west, hills providing observation and fields of fire, forests offering concealment for counterattacking armor. The weather could turn at any moment, grounding Allied aircraft and transforming roads into impassable mud. Logistics presented the greatest challenge. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every ration had to be trucked forward from the Normandy beaches over roads that German demolitions and Allied bombing had reduced to rubble. The further Patton advanced, the longer his supply lines became, and the more vulnerable those lines were to German interdiction. Senior Allied commanders estimated the advance would proceed at perhaps 10 to 15 miles per day, a respectable pace given the circumstances. This careful, methodical advance would minimize casualties and maintain supply integrity. George Patton had absolutely no intention of advancing carefully or methodically. The moment Third Army became operational, Patton began moving. His armored columns didn't wait for infantry support. They didn't pause to consolidate gains. They identified weak points in German defenses and drove through them, pushing reconnaissance units 50 miles ahead of the main force, using speed itself as a weapon. Within 3 days, the Third Army had advanced 70 miles. Within a week, American tanks were 100 miles beyond the Normandy perimeter, so far forward that they'd driven off their maps, and navigators had to use French road maps purchased in village stores. Patton moved his headquarters every 2 days to stay close to the fighting, riding in a jeep or commandeered tank, appearing without warning at forward command posts to demand updates and push commanders to move faster. He reorganized his logistics on the fly, establishing fuel dumps using captured German stocks, commandeering civilian trucks, and ordering his supply officers to ignore peacetime regulations about proper requisition procedures. The Third Army consumed 500,000 gallons of fuel daily, far more than supply planners had allocated, and when fuel ran short, Patton's logistics officers stole it from other Allied units. The advance became a rolling thunder that terrified the Germans and amazed Allied commanders who had never seen an army move with such ferocity. By August 7, the Third Army had isolated Brittany and was pushing toward the Loire River. By August 10, American reconnaissance units had reached Chartres, barely 60 miles from Paris. The German command structure began to collapse under the pressure, with entire divisions losing contact with their headquarters and retreating independently, trying to escape encirclement. On August 12, 1944, First Lieutenant James Halloran of the 37th Tank Battalion stood beside a destroyed German supply truck near the village of Le Mans, staring at something that made no sense. The truck had been heading northeast, away from the main German retreat route. Its cargo, artillery shells and medical supplies, suggested it was moving toward German positions, not evacuating them. This was the third such truck Halloran's reconnaissance platoon had found in 2 days, all heading in unexpected directions, all carrying supplies that indicated the Germans were still attempting to reinforce positions the Third Army assumed were being abandoned. Halloran was 24 years old, a mathematics teacher from Ohio before the war, with a mind that sought patterns in chaos. He spread his map on the hood of his Jeep and began marking the locations of every destroyed German vehicle his unit had encountered over the past week. What emerged was strange. The supply vehicles weren't following the main roads, which Allied aircraft had turned into killing zones. Instead, they moved along minor roads and farm tracks, traveling at night, dispersing before dawn. And they weren't moving randomly. Halloran noticed that every Thursday the number of German supply vehicles increased dramatically along 3 specific roads that converged near the village of Écouché, 20 miles southeast of his position. It was such a clear pattern that Halloran wondered if it was a deception, but the burned-out trucks and their scattered cargo proved these were real supply convoys, not decoys. He spent 4 hours that evening drawing a diagram on a piece of cardboard from a ration box, using charcoal to mark the roads and arrows to show the direction of movement. When he finished, he had a simple, crude drawing that showed 3 German supply routes all converging at Écouché, all most active on Thursday nights. If his pattern was correct, the next major German resupply effort would occur in exactly 4 days. Halloran requested permission to brief his findings at the battalion command post. When Halloran entered the battalion command tent on the evening of August 12th, carrying his cardboard diagram, Colonel Richard Morrison was reviewing casualty reports from that day's advance. Morrison had commanded tanks since North Africa, and he'd seen hundreds of junior officers with theories about enemy movements. He glanced at Halloran's drawing and said, "Lieutenant, what the hell am I looking at?" Halloran explained the pattern he'd observed, the convergence of supply routes, the Thursday night surge in German traffic, the opportunity to interdict multiple convoys simultaneously if they positioned a small blocking force at Écouché. Morrison studied the diagram for perhaps 30 seconds before shaking his head. "This looks like something my 6-year-old would draw," he said. "You're telling me the Germans are running their entire supply network through one village on one night of the week?" That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Two majors standing nearby laughed. One said, "Sir, I think the lieutenant's been in the sun too long." Morrison handed the cardboard back to Halloran. "We're advancing 20 miles a day, Lieutenant. We don't have time for ambushes based on guesswork." Dismissed. Halloran left the tent, but he couldn't shake the certainty that his analysis was correct. The pattern was too clear, too consistent. That night he approached Captain Peter Donovan, his company commander, a 32-year-old career officer from Virginia who'd earned a Bronze Star at Normandy. Halloran showed him the diagram and explained his reasoning. Donovan studied it for a long time, then asked, "How certain are you?" Halloran said, 90%, sir. The Germans have to resupply their forward positions, and they can't use the main roads during daylight. This convergence point is the only place where minor roads from 3 different supply depots meet. They're using Thursday nights because our air patrols are lighter then. Donovan made a decision that would change both their careers. "I'll give you 12 men and 2 jeeps. You have 72 hours to confirm this pattern. If you're right, we'll hit them." Halloran selected 11 men from his platoon, soldiers he knew could move quietly, shoot accurately, and follow orders without question. Sergeant Daniel Kozlowski, a Polish immigrant from Detroit, became his second in command. The team included 2 BAR gunners, a radio man, a medic, and 6 riflemen, all veterans of the Normandy fighting. They carried no heavy weapons, no explosives, just their individual arms, ammunition, and 3 days of rations. On the night of August 13, they moved into positions overlooking the 3 roads that converged at Écouché, hiding in tree lines and abandoned farm buildings, watching in shifts. For the first 2 nights, they saw minimal traffic, an occasional German motorcycle courier, a few civilian vehicles. But on Thursday night, August 16, at exactly 2 a.m., the pattern Halloran predicted materialized. From the northwest, a convoy of 6 trucks appeared, moving slowly without headlights, navigating by moonlight. From the southwest, 4 more trucks approached. From the northeast, another 5. Within 30 minutes, 15 German supply trucks had passed through Écouché, all heading toward German positions near Argentan, where American and British forces were attempting to close the Falaise pocket and trap the entire German 7th Army. Halloran didn't attack. His orders were to confirm the pattern, nothing more. But as he watched those trucks disappear into the darkness, carrying ammunition and food that would allow German soldiers to kill more Americans, he felt a cold anger that transcended his usual analytical detachment. He radioed Captain Donovan with a simple message. "Pattern confirmed. 15 vehicles. Request permission to engage next Thursday." Donovan's response came back within an hour. "Permission granted. You have operational control. Make it count." Planning the ambush consumed every waking hour for the next 5 days. Halloran had 12 men, now 13 as Donovan insisted on joining the operation, and they would be attacking a target of unknown size, with no backup, no artillery support, and no clear escape route if things went wrong. The tactical challenge was immense. They couldn't simply shoot at the trucks as they passed through Écouché, because the Germans would radio for help and reinforcements would arrive within an hour. They needed to destroy the convoys completely, quickly, and then disappear before the German response could organize. Halloran studied the terrain around Écouché obsessively. The 3 roads converged at a T-junction on the southern edge of the village, where a stone bridge crossed a small stream. The bridge was narrow, wide enough for 1 truck at a time. If they could block the bridge, the convoys would be trapped on the road with no room to maneuver. Halloran's plan was simple but required perfect timing. They would allow the first convoy to cross the bridge, then destroy the bridge itself using explosives they would steal from an American engineer unit. The lead convoy would be trapped on the far side, unable to retreat. The following convoys would be trapped on the near side, unable to advance. Then Halloran's 13 men would destroy all the vehicles using rifle fire, BARs, and grenades, focusing on fuel tanks and ammunition cargo to create maximum destruction with minimum ammunition expenditure. The entire attack had to be completed in less than 30 minutes. Captain Donovan listened to the plan and said, "If this works, you'll be a hero. If it fails, you'll be court-martialed for wasting military resources and getting men killed based on a pattern you drew on a piece of cardboard." Halloran said, "I understand, sir." Donovan smiled. "Then let's go steal some explosives." On the night of August 22nd, Halloran's team moved into position around the Écouché Bridge. They'd spent the previous night planting demolition charges on the bridge supports, wiring them to a detonator positioned 50 yards away in a stone barn. The team divided into 4 groups. Kozlowski commanded the group that would engage the lead convoy after it crossed the bridge. Halloran commanded the group that would engage the convoys trapped on the near side. Donovan positioned himself with the detonator, ready to blow the bridge at Halloran's signal. 2 men with the radio stayed in reserve, ready to call for extraction if the team survived. The night was warm and moonless, perfect for German supply movement. At 1:45 a.m., Halloran heard the distant growl of truck engines. His heart rate accelerated, adrenaline sharpening his senses until he could hear individual insects in the grass and smell the stone dust from the ruined buildings around him. At 2:03 a.m., the first convoy appeared from the northwest. 6 trucks, exactly as they'd appeared the previous Thursday. The trucks approached the bridge slowly, their drivers nervous, scanning the darkness for threats. The lead truck crossed the bridge, then the second, then the third. Halloran waited, every muscle tense, until all 6 trucks had crossed. Then he raised his hand and dropped it. Donovan pressed the detonator. The bridge exploded in a flash of orange fire and white smoke, the stone supports disintegrating, the roadway collapsing into the stream in a cloud of dust and debris. The sound was catastrophic, echoing across the countryside, and for a moment, Halloran feared they'd alerted every German unit within 10 miles. But there was no turning back now. The second convoy, 4 trucks from the southwest, had just reached the bridge and found their path blocked by smoking rubble. The trucks stopped, confused, engines idling. Halloran stood up, aimed his M1 Garand at the lead truck's fuel tank, and fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. The bullets punched through the thin metal, and gasoline began pouring onto the road. He fired a tracer round into the spreading puddle, and the truck erupted in flames that lit up the night like a beacon from hell. The ambush became a slaughter. The German drivers, caught completely by surprise, had no time to organize a defense or deploy their cargo. Halloran's men poured rifle fire and BAR bursts into the trapped trucks, aiming for fuel tanks, tires, and engines. Within 2 minutes, all 4 trucks on the near side of the bridge were burning, their ammunition cargo beginning to cook off, sending tracers and shell fragments screaming into the darkness. On the far side of the bridge, Kozlowski's team opened fire on the 6 trucks of the lead convoy, which had stopped when they heard the bridge explosion. The German soldiers in those trucks tried to fight back, jumping from their vehicles and returning fire with rifles and submachine guns. But they were silhouetted against their own headlights, and Kozlowski's men were firing from concealed positions in total darkness. One by one, the trucks exploded or caught fire. German soldiers ran into the fields, seeking cover, and Halloran let them go. His mission was to destroy supplies, not kill men. But the third convoy, approaching from the northeast, saw the flames and stopped a quarter-mile short of the bridge. The drivers began turning their vehicles around, attempting to retreat. Halloran made a split-second decision that violated his own plan. He ordered 3 men to pursue on foot. Those 3 soldiers, Private First Class James Mitchell, Private Robert Hernandez, and Private Thomas O'Brien, ran a quarter-mile in full combat gear, overtook the retreating convoy, and attacked the lead truck with grenades. The truck swerved off the road and overturned, blocking the narrow lane. The remaining trucks stopped, trapped, and the 3 Americans systematically destroyed them, one after another, firing into fuel tanks until each vehicle was engulfed in flames. The entire ambush lasted 26 minutes. When Halloran ordered withdrawal, 15 German supply trucks were burning, their cargo destroyed, their drivers either dead or fled into the countryside. His team had suffered 0 casualties, fired fewer than 500 rounds of ammunition, and created a column of black smoke visible for 30 miles. As they retreated toward American lines, Halloran realized something remarkable. They could do this again. Captain Donovan filed an after-action report describing the ambush as a successful interdiction operation, without mentioning the cardboard diagram or Halloran's pattern analysis. He credited luck and good reconnaissance, expecting the report to disappear into the administrative machinery of a rapidly advancing army. Instead, 2 days later, Donovan received orders to report to 3rd Army headquarters. General Patton wanted to see him. Patton's headquarters occupied a commandeered chateau 15 miles west of Chartres, its walls covered with maps showing the Third Army's advance and the collapsing German defensive lines. Donovan entered the operations room expecting a routine debriefing, but instead found Patton himself, flanked by 3 colonels and a British intelligence liaison. Patton was smaller than Donovan expected, barely 5'9", but his physical presence dominated the room. He wore cavalry boots polished to a mirror shine, twin ivory-handled revolvers on his belt, and a scowl that could strip paint. He looked at Donovan and said, "Captain, I read your report. You destroyed 15 trucks with 13 men and no casualties. How?" Donovan explained Halloran's pattern analysis, the observation of convoy routes, the Thursday night convergence at Écouché. He showed Patton the original cardboard diagram, now folded and creased from being carried in his pocket. Patton studied it for a long time, then said, "This is brilliant. This is exactly the kind of tactical thinking that wins wars. Why the hell did your battalion commander reject it?" Donovan said carefully, "Sir, Colonel Morrison believed the pattern was too simple to be real." Patton's face turned red. "Too simple? War is simple. The side that moves faster, hits harder, and disrupts enemy logistics wins. Your lieutenant understood that. I want him here tomorrow, and I want you to do this again." Next Thursday. Same location if possible, different location if necessary. I want every German supply convoy in this sector destroyed for the next month. Donovan said, "Sir, we'll need support, more men, heavier weapons, dedicated intelligence." Patton shook his head. "You'll have exactly what you had last time. 13 men. Infantry weapons. No artillery, no air support. I want to know if this can be replicated by small teams across the entire front. If it can, I'm going to train 500 teams and unleash them behind German lines." It was an order and a test, and Donovan understood that failure would end both his and Halloran's careers. For the next 4 Thursdays, Halloran's team struck German supply convoys with devastating precision. The second attack hit a convergence point near Alençon, destroying 8 trucks and capturing 2 German supply officers who provided intelligence on depot locations and scheduling. The third attack targeted a convoy near Mortagne-au-Perche, destroying 6 trucks loaded with artillery ammunition. The fourth attack hit convoys near Belém, destroying 5 trucks and a fuel tanker that exploded with such force it shattered windows in the village a mile away. The 5th attack struck near Mamers, destroying 7 trucks carrying winter uniforms and medical supplies, intended for German units defending the Seine River crossings. In total, over the course of 1 month, Halloran's 13-man team destroyed 31 German supply vehicles, killed or captured 47 enemy soldiers, and forced the German command to completely reorganize their logistics network, moving convoys during daylight hours where Allied aircraft could target them. The strategic impact exceeded anything Halloran had imagined. German units across the Third Army's sector began running short of ammunition, fuel, and food. Artillery batteries reduced their fire rates to conserve shells. Tank units sat immobile for lack of fuel. Infantry companies rationed food to 1 meal per day. German commanders filed reports describing the phantom American interdiction teams that seemed to appear from nowhere, destroy entire convoys, and vanish before reinforcements could respond. The Germans began dedicating infantry companies to convoy protection, pulling men from defensive positions, which weakened their ability to resist Patton's main advance. By mid-September, German supply operations in central France had effectively collapsed, not because of Allied air superiority or artillery bombardment, but because of small teams of American soldiers using pattern analysis and precise tactical strikes to create disproportionate effects. Patton, watching this unfold, ordered the formation of 50 additional interdiction teams, each trained by Halloran in his methods. These teams deployed across the Third Army's front, and within weeks, German logistics operations from the Seine to the Moselle River were in chaos. What the official records never recorded, what Halloran never mentioned in his reports, was the night of September 2nd, during the attack near Mamers, when everything went wrong. The team had positioned themselves for the ambush when a German patrol stumbled onto their position. A firefight erupted in pitch darkness, with muzzle flashes and tracer rounds the only illumination. Private Hernandez took a bullet through the shoulder. Sergeant Kozlowski was hit in the leg. The German patrol called for reinforcements, and within minutes, Halloran could hear trucks approaching with more enemy soldiers. The mission was blown, and the only rational decision was immediate withdrawal, leaving the wounded, if necessary, to save the rest of the team. Instead, Halloran did something that still haunts him in his nightmares. He ordered Kozlowski and 3 other soldiers to withdraw with Hernandez, getting him to an aid station as quickly as possible. Then, Halloran took the remaining 8 men and attacked the approaching German reinforcements head-on. It was tactically insane. 8 lightly armed Americans attacking a reinforced German convoy, but Halloran understood that if the Germans pursued his wounded men, they would all be captured or killed. So, he created a diversion. His team ambushed the lead German truck with grenades, setting it ablaze, then retreated through a forest, firing periodically to keep the Germans focused on pursuit. For 3 hours, Halloran led the German force in circles through the woods, always staying just ahead, always leaving just enough evidence of his passage to keep them chasing. 2 of his men were wounded in the running fight. One, Private O'Brien, took a bullet through the calf and had to be carried. But Halloran kept moving, kept the Germans engaged, until dawn broke and Allied aircraft appeared overhead. Only then did he break contact, carrying O'Brien the final 2 miles to American lines. Hernandez survived. Kozlowski recovered. O'Brien lost part of his leg but lived. And Halloran never filed a report about that night. Never mentioned the risk he'd taken, never sought recognition for the decision that saved his men's lives at the potential cost of his own. It was simply what officers did, he believed. They protected their soldiers, even when it defied tactical logic. In the immediate aftermath of the final convoy ambush on September 9, Halloran's team returned to American lines exhausted, filthy, and running on nervous energy that had sustained them through a month of night operations. They'd been behind German lines or in no man's land for weeks, sleeping in 2-hour shifts, eating cold rations, drinking from streams because carrying water was too heavy. Halloran himself had lost 17 pounds. His hands shook constantly from adrenaline and caffeine. He couldn't sleep without seeing the faces of German soldiers he'd killed, young men who'd been doing their duty just as he was doing his. The psychological toll of ambush warfare was different from conventional combat. There was something predatory about it, something that made you feel less like a soldier and more like a killer. His men showed signs of strain. Kozlowski had developed a nervous tic, constantly checking and rechecking his weapon. Mitchell talked in his sleep, reliving firefights. Several men requested transfer back to conventional units, unable to handle the stress of operating in isolation behind enemy lines. Captain Donovan ordered the team stood down for 2 weeks of rest, but Halloran couldn't rest. He spent those days analyzing maps, identifying new convoy routes, refining his methods. The war was moving too fast. Patton's Third Army had reached the German border, Paris had been liberated, and the entire character of the fighting had changed. The opportunities for convoy interdiction that existed in August were disappearing as German forces retreated into prepared defensive positions. Halloran felt a desperate urgency to continue the operations, knowing that every day of rest meant German supplies getting through, German soldiers fed and armed, American soldiers dying in attacks that might have been prevented. But his body betrayed him. On September 12th, he collapsed from exhaustion and was hospitalized for 4 days, forced to rest whether he wanted to or not. The strategic consequences of Halloran's operations extended far beyond the 31 trucks his team destroyed. Military historians analyzing Patton's advance through France have identified late August and early September 1944 as the critical period when German defensive capabilities collapsed completely. Multiple factors contributed. Allied air superiority, Patton's aggressive mobile tactics, German command confusion. But disruption of German logistics played a crucial and often underappreciated role. The German army in France required approximately 1,200 tons of supplies daily to maintain defensive operations. By early September, they were receiving fewer than 400 tons per day, a shortfall that made sustained resistance impossible. German artillery units that normally fired 200 rounds per day were limited to 20. Tank battalions that required 5,000 gallons of fuel daily received fewer than 1,000. Infantry companies that needed regular food deliveries were starving. This logistics collapse forced German commanders to abandon defensive positions they might otherwise have held, accelerating Patton's advance by an estimated 2 to 3 weeks. Those weeks translated directly into lives saved. American casualties during rapid advances were dramatically lower than casualties during static defensive fighting. Military analysts estimate that every week Patton's advance was accelerated saved approximately 2,000 American lives and 4,000 wounded. If Halloran's interdiction operations contributed even partially to accelerating the advance by 2 weeks, they saved approximately 4,000 American lives. Additionally, the German supplies that never reached the front meant German soldiers couldn't fight effectively when they did engage American forces, further reducing American casualties. The ripple effects extended even further. Patton's rapid advance freed over 5 million French civilians weeks earlier than expected, sparing them from German occupation and the destruction that accompanies prolonged combat. It prevented the Germans from demolishing bridges, factories, and infrastructure they would have destroyed during a slower, more organized retreat. and it positioned Allied forces to reach the German border before winter, setting the stage for the final campaigns of 1945. Halloran's story disappeared from official histories for reasons both mundane and systemic. First, he was a junior officer whose operations occurred during a period of rapid advance, when thousands of similar small unit actions went unrecorded. Second, Captain Donovan, who might have advocated for Halloran's recognition, was killed by German artillery on September 18th, near Metz. And with him died much of the institutional knowledge of the interdiction operations. Third, Patton himself, the one senior officer who understood the significance of Halloran's work, died in a car accident on December 21, 1945, near Mannheim, Germany, after his staff car collided with an American truck. Patton's death was sudden and shocking. He'd survived 4 years of combat without serious injury, only to die in a traffic accident during peacetime. He never wrote his memoirs, never had the opportunity to highlight the junior officers whose innovations contributed to his success. Fourth, Halloran himself was profoundly uncomfortable with attention or recognition. He was a mathematics teacher, not a career soldier, and he viewed his wartime service as a temporary duty to be completed and then left behind. When the war ended in May 1945, Halloran requested immediate discharge and returned to civilian life. He declined offers to attend Staff College or accept a regular Army commission. He wanted no part of military life beyond what duty required. Finally, the narrative of World War II that emerged in the late 1940s and 1950s emphasized grand battles, famous generals, and heroic sacrifices, not the quiet tactical innovations of junior officers working behind the scenes. Stories like Halloran's didn't fit the template of how Americans wanted to remember the war. So, they were quietly forgotten. Halloran received no medals for his convoy interdiction operations. The Bronze Star he was awarded cited meritorious service during the advance through France, without specifying what that service entailed. Captain Donovan had nominated him for the Silver Star, but the paperwork was lost when Donovan died, and no one else pursued it. In 1947, an Army historian compiling records of Third Army operations found references to small unit interdiction teams in Patton's daily logs and began investigating. He interviewed several members of Halloran's team and reconstructed the basic facts of the operations. His report, filed in 1949, recommended that Halloran be retroactively awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, and that his methods be incorporated into Army doctrine for special operations. But by 1949, Halloran had returned to Ohio, resumed teaching mathematics at a high school in Akron, and made it clear he wanted nothing to do with his wartime service. He declined interviews, refused to attend veterans' reunions, and asked that his name be removed from any official recognition. The Army respected his wishes and filed the report without further action. It wasn't until 1987, when a military historian researching logistics operations in World War II stumbled across the 1949 report, that Halloran's story began to resurface. The historian, Dr. Margaret Chen, tracked down Halloran, then 77 years old and retired, and convinced him to discuss his wartime experiences. The interviews revealed not just the tactical details of the convoy ambushes, but Halloran's philosophical approach to warfare. His belief that pattern analysis and intelligence could achieve effects disproportionate to force size. His conviction that small teams of highly trained soldiers could disrupt enemy operations more effectively than massive conventional attacks. His understanding that war was fundamentally a contest of logistics, and that destroying enemy supplies was more valuable than killing enemy soldiers. After the war, Halloran returned to Akron, Ohio in July 1945, married his high school sweetheart Dorothy Mills in August, and resumed teaching mathematics at Central High School in September. His life after the war was deliberately ordinary. He and Dorothy had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. He taught geometry and trigonometry to generations of Akron teenagers, coached the math team, and served as faculty advisor for the chess club. His students had no idea he'd fought in the war until one, researching a history project in 1963, discovered his name in a book about the Third Army and asked if he was the same James Halloran. He confirmed it, but refused to discuss details, saying only, "I did my job like millions of other men. It's not something to brag about." His colleagues found him quiet, analytical, kind to students, but demanding of excellence. He had a peculiar habit of analyzing traffic patterns in the school parking lot and suggesting more efficient flows during dismissal times. He couldn't watch war movies. They gave him nightmares. He rarely attended veterans events, though he donated regularly to veterans charities and helped several former students apply for ROTC scholarships. Dorothy once said he woke up screaming at least once a week for the first 10 years after the war. Always the same nightmare about men burning in trucks. But he never discussed it, and eventually the nightmares faded. He retired from teaching in 1982 at age 72, spent his final years gardening and playing chess with his grandchildren, and died quietly in his sleep on March 14, 1998, at age 88. His obituary in the Akron Beacon-Journal mentioned he was a World War II veteran, but provided no details. The historical importance of Halloran's convoy interdiction operations extends beyond their immediate tactical success to their demonstration of a principle that would become central to American military doctrine: that small, highly trained units using intelligence and precision can achieve strategic effects far beyond their size. This principle, force multiplication through intelligence and precision, became foundational to special operations thinking in the second half of the 20th century. The Army's Special Forces, established in 1952, incorporated many of Halloran's methods into their training: pattern analysis, terrain exploitation, hit-and-run tactics, logistics interdiction. The Navy SEALs, formed in 1962, studied World War II small unit operations, including the convoy ambushes, as models for unconventional warfare. During Vietnam, American long-range reconnaissance patrols used techniques remarkably similar to Halloran's, though few officers knew the historical precedent. But Halloran's operations also revealed something deeper about how America won World War II. The United States didn't triumph through superior numbers alone, or industrial production alone, or technological innovation alone. It won because hundreds of thousands of individual Americans, teachers, farmers, factory workers, shopkeepers, brought their civilian expertise to military problems and created solutions that professional soldiers hadn't considered. Halloran was a mathematics teacher who saw patterns others missed. Thousands of American officers and enlisted men brought similar civilian skills: engineering, logistics, communications, management, and applied them to warfare with devastating effect. This democratization of military innovation, where good ideas could come from anywhere regardless of rank or background, gave American forces a flexibility and adaptability that authoritarian armies couldn't match. The German army in World War II was tactically proficient and operationally skilled, but it was also rigidly hierarchical, with innovation expected to flow downward from general staff planners, not upward from junior officers. When a lieutenant like Halloran proposed an unconventional approach, American commanders, particularly Patton, were willing to listen, authorize, and support. That openness to innovation from below was as much a weapon as any tank or aircraft. The story of James Halloran and his 12 men resonates today because it embodies values Americans still cherish and ideals that still define the national character. It's a story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, not for glory or recognition, but because duty demanded it. Halloran didn't seek medals or fame. He identified a problem, developed a solution, and executed it with the resources available, then went home to resume his life teaching teenagers about geometry. That quiet competence, that refusal to be defined by his wartime achievements, that commitment to service without expectation of reward, these are distinctly American virtues, rooted in a tradition that values contribution over status and substance over appearance. The story also reminds us what previous generations sacrificed so current generations could live in freedom. Halloran and millions like him left their families, risked their lives, endured physical and psychological trauma, not for conquest or empire, but to defeat tyranny and defend human dignity. They came home, asked for nothing, and built the most prosperous and free society in human history through their labor and their commitment to democratic values. Their legacy isn't just the military victories they achieved or the territory they liberated. It's the example they set of citizenship that prioritizes duty, courage that operates without audience, and sacrifice that expects no reward. In an era when American military power is often debated and American values sometimes questioned, stories like Halloran's provide moral clarity. They remind us that American strength is always derived not from aggression or domination, but from the character of individual Americans who step forward when history demands it, who solve impossible problems with creativity and determination, who protect their comrades even at mortal risk, and who return to ordinary life without seeking glory. The greatest military in history is great not because of its technology or budget, but because of the character of the men and women who serve in it, inheriting a tradition of excellence and innovation that Halloran and his generation established. That tradition of citizen soldiers bringing civilian virtues to military service, of junior leaders empowered to innovate, of missions accomplished through intelligence and precision rather than brute force, remains the foundation of American military success and the guarantee of American freedom.